Welcome back to the Physics of Faith podcast. I'm Tim.
I'm Tommy.
And today we're going to be doing Daniel chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. Yeah. As we mentioned last time, Daniel, this was new for us. We jumped back into the Old Testament.
Right.
This is the first time doing an Old Testament book.
Mm-hmm.
We went through chapter 1. We learned a little bit about Jehoiakim and the Babylonians taking Israel.
Right.
Taking it from the Egyptians, ultimately. And they pick these young, noble men, and they say, we're going to put them in our court. We're going to try to indoctrinate them.
Right.
And Daniel stands out.
Yeah.
And his three buddies, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Or Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, depending on when you're talking about them. Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's weird that we know them by their Babylonian names.
Yeah.
And not by their Hebrew names, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably because that's how they refer to them when they talk about them in the fiery furnace, I think. Though that's kind of when you
That makes sense. Yeah, you don't really think about them before. You don't realize they're kind of there. Yeah. Although it does, and we'll get to this when we get to that, but it makes me wonder where Daniel is during the fiery furnace scene. But
yeah.
But we'll get to that.
Yep.
Because we're not talking about the fiery furnace today.
We'll get there.
Today we're going to be talking about chapter 2, which is going to be centered around a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. And so let's just get to it.
Mm-hmm.
Sound good? All right. So we're going to start with verses 1 through 13 here in Daniel chapter 2. Now in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call in the soothsayer priests, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, to tell the king his dream. So they came in and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand this dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied to the Chaldeans, the command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be burned into a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied, I know for certain that you are trying to buy time, because you have perceived that the command from me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, so that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is no person on earth who could declare the matter to the king, because no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any soothsayer, priest, sorcerer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king commands is difficult, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except gods, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. Because of this, the king became angry and extremely furious, and he gave orders to kill all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued that the wise men be killed, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. All right, so King's having bad dreams.
Yeah, King. Yeah, he had some spicy food last night, so he's having bad dreams.
That's why I don't eat Babylonian right before bed. Right?
This is when it comes to dreams, I've always find it interesting because God speaks to multiple people in the Bible via dreams, but I think it's also important not everything you read have a dream is God. When you're riding an ATV through the streets of London and a pink horse rides up to you and says, "Hey, did you hear what the Rocky Mountains said to me yesterday?" That's not real.
The point is that dreams can be pretty absurd.
Yeah.
They don't all have meaning.
Yeah.
Exactly. But this particular dream gave the king a great anxiety.
Yeah.
Right. And you could also say that his anxiety the word can be translated to mean he was disturbed by this, right? So this was disturbing. I think also what we probably should be able to infer from the text is that he didn't just have a dream.
Yeah.
It was recurring.
Yeah.
Right? Now, even then, like, I don't have a recurring dream, but I have a recurring theme that pops up in some of my dreams that is that I'm about to do something that I'm not prepared to do.
Yeah.
Right? Which speaks to some of my, anxieties and, some psychiatrists or whoever it is, scientists will tell you that, like, when you're dreaming, it's your brain trying to help you deal with certain fears, right? It's almost like a training ground, right?
Yeah.
For your brain.
I don't ever remember any of my dreams. Like, I might remember them for like an hour or two after like I first wake up, and then I'm like, what was that? Did that happen before that or after that? Like, I had a dream last night. All I remember is that I'm driving in the car, and I don't think I was driving, I was writing, and I saw the gas station sign and turned like, oh my gosh, gas is $4.48? That's all I remember. And I was driving this morning, and I saw a gas station sign like, I thought it was $4.48. Oh, that was my dream that I had last night.
Well, in this day and age,
it
this
could
economy.
Be. Yeah, we're not in California. We're in Missouri, so yeah.
All right, so this dream is more than just a pizza dream that the king is having, right? It's really effective. It's so much so that he can't sleep.
Yeah.
And people at this point were a little bit more inclined to the spiritual as well. So he's saying, look, here's the thing. There's something going on. I need somebody to tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
So he gets all of his spiritual advisors and wise men. And one thing that's interesting here, though, is Daniel and his crew are not there.
Yeah.
Right? Which I always find really weird because at the end of that passage we just read, he's like, all right, we're going to kill all the wise men. So they went to go find Daniel.
Right.
To kill him. Well, he's not there. He's not. You didn't even give him a chance. Yeah. Right? And you can kind of see as we're reading this, and you'll see this as this text goes on, King Nebuchadnezzar is a roller coaster.
I was just thinking that. I'm like, that is really the only way to describe him because, you're right. I mean, it is just up and down with him. He's like, oh, he's got it together. No, he doesn't. He's very angry, and then he's grateful, and then he's angry, and then he's, worship. He's kind of
absolutely
kind of wild nut.
He is a prototype for like what the whole, ancient king
for sure
who is so full of himself and just is ruling by emotion essentially, right?
Yep.
So he says to them, look, I don't want you to just tell me what the dream means. I want you to tell me what the dream is, right? And if you don't tell me, I'm going to dismember you and burn down your house.
Right.
It's just, standard stuff.
This is the words of a sane man.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's really interesting. And we do have reason to believe this is exactly how this type of king would have behaved with this type of matter. Right. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately what they're concerned about is their legacy. Yeah. Which is the only thing they're concerned about. Right. Mm-hmm. So this dream he feels is about his kingdom, his legacy, who he is. He needs to understand it. But it's interesting. He says, like, you need to tell me what the dream is before you tell me what the interpretation is. Yeah. Because if you don't, then I don't believe that you have the power to interpret my dream.
That's the thing that I found most interesting about this. Because, when you read that and you kind of, like, you read into this and you kind of assume, okay, that's what these guys do, is interpret his dreams. So he would tell them the dream, and then they would explain it to him. But as we know, they're all snake oil salesmen. They're con artists. That they're sorcerers and astrologers. We know that none of that is real. Yeah. And so basically they were just faking their way through it, and telling him whatever, that makes you happy or whatever, trying to please him is really probably, again, that's not written here. That's just kind of what we can assume based on things.
Well, he makes that accusation though, too, right? Like,
He's starting to. He's kind of catching on to this, I think. Which is and that's kind of what was this dream. There was something about this dream that was different. Yeah, that he was. Yeah, like you said, he was so worried that he kept him up. That something about this dream really wanted to make sure he was getting the truth, and it set him apart from all the past times when he would tell them their dream, and and then they would interpret it for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And he accuses them of stalling. He's like,
Yeah.
you're just trying to stall. You're trying to, and specifically to lie to me and to come up with a plan for how to get out of this. How are you going to weasel out of this?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think something else that's really interesting about this is how they respond to the king and like why they say it can't be done. And there's like two major reasons that it can't be done that they cite. And the first is that no king has ever asked this of anyone before.
Yeah.
And something that's interesting about that is they're basically saying it can't be done because it's never been asked before. But what they're doing there is they're shifting responsibility to the king.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the response you want because you're being unreasonable, king.
Right.
Right. So they're shifting it back to Nebuchadnezzar as politely as they can.
Yeah.
And at that point, what do you have to lose? Because he's going to kill you anyway, right?
Yeah.
And then they say the second reason is only a god could do this, and gods don't dwell in mortal flesh, right? Now, this is, to me, this is incredible that they said it this way, that they said this. Because when you think about what's about to happen, right, who Daniel serves and who Daniel foretells as coming, and we think about who God is and what he did in Jesus Christ, this is a classic archetype of people who don't believe that Jesus could be God.
Yeah.
Right? That's not how gods work.
Yeah.
That's not what gods do, right? And I think about like today we have, obviously we're not like, people are less into the spiritualism. They're more into like a pseudo-intellectualism and kind of like, reason and logic and this and that, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times abandoning both reason and logic to say that. But they'll say things like, well, if God was real, he would have done this or he would have done that, right?
Yeah.
What they do is they take God and they say, for him to be God, he has to act the way that I think he should act.
Yeah.
Right? And that's exactly what these guys are doing is they're like, look, gods don't behave this way.
Yeah.
And this is a big thing where God's going to say, who are you to tell me how I act or what I'm capable of, or what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Right. So I think this for me that particular line was very, very interesting, and very, very telling.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also this all and I think you mentioned and you did get to a point there that the spiritual, as we talk about the astrologers and the people that say like, oh, how religious are you? I'm very spiritual. Like that's not what this is. That's different from what you're worshiping something that is really the God. You may work in gods or something that is God. What many people like agnostics might believe. Like, I believe that there's something. I don't know what, but I believe that there's something, And so it kind of shows you that that's where Nebuchadnezzar is and that's where these guys are and how different that is from what we truly believe and what Jesus tells us and what the truth of God really is. Right, exactly. And I think too, people today don't understand what it means to have this type of conviction in things that are spiritual, right? Yeah. Because I think, we've been calling these wise men and these, quote unquote wise men and these soothsayers charlatans. And, because to a degree they are. Right. But I think there's also a level of belief within them. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think there's a level of conviction within them that they think that they are serving actual gods. Mm-hmm. And the king of a nation is consulting them. Why? Because he believes that there is something more than just what is finite. Sure. Right? And I think this is something that a lot of people today don't understand is what it means to have a conviction in something spiritual. Yeah. Yeah, it's one thing to say you believe it. Yeah. It's another thing to live it. Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Exactly. All right, so why don't we jump into 14? And so this is where we're going to go 14 through 18, and this is where they find Daniel. And again, verse 13 ends with them being like, okay, so they couldn't answer him, so they're like, we're just going to go kill every wise man in the country, which includes Daniel and his friends who aren't there. Yeah. All right, so verses 14 through 18. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He said to Arioch,
the king's officer, "For what reason is the decree from the king so harsh?" Then Arioch informed Daniel of the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him a grace period so that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his friends would not be killed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. All right, so Daniel is calm and collected. They show up to kill him, and he's like,
hold on, why?
"Can I ask you, hey, friend,
Yeah.
what's going on exactly? What is the reason for this harshness?"
Yeah.
Which means he doesn't even know what the decree was.
Right.
And so, you can see, this is a rather harsh thing, right?
Yeah.
Now, we already know from chapter 1, Daniel has favor, right? And the king met Daniel and was like, nobody's like this dude.
Yeah.
Nobody's like his friends. These guys are the standouts, right?
Yeah.
Which then also makes me wonder, well, why didn't he invite
Go
them?
to Daniel in the first place.
Yeah. So ultimately, Arioch kind of puts his neck on the line here because he lets Daniel go see the king.
Yeah.
Right. And so this will, Arioch knows, though, if it pays off, he could get a little credit out of this. But
Yeah.
but Daniel has favor, and he goes to the king and he asks for, "Hey, give me a little time to do the work."
Yeah.
And the king agrees.
Yeah.
Right. So the reason he agrees is because Daniel is not stalling.
Yeah.
Daniel is like, well, if I'm going to get an answer from God, I need to have time to go to God and ask him for that answer.
Right.
Right. And so the king agrees and sees the genuineness, I would assume,
Yeah.
in Daniel for this.
Yeah. No, I think I think you bring up a good point there in that he does the difference from the first guys. What Daniel says is like, well, no, we can't do that. Daniel says, all right, well, give me some time, and the king gives them some time.
Yeah.
He accuses the other guys of stalling, but he's not accusing Daniel of stalling. He's going along with like, okay, well, I guess he's going to do what he says he's going to do.
Yeah. But we also see from the beginning, Daniel speaks with discretion and discernment. Right?
Yeah.
He doesn't come across as aggrandizing as some of these, or as sycophantic as some of these other guys, where they're just, we're just trying to get the king to feel good and do this.
Yeah.
He's earnest.
Well, and you also wonder, why wasn't Daniel there in the first place? You also wonder, obviously this says in the second year of his reign, so some time has gone on, but, as it talked about when they brought in Daniel and what are their names in here? The three guys, not Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Those are their real names. They were young, almost boys,
Right.
And so you almost wonder, like, okay, maybe while he knew that Daniel kind of was a little different, they weren't as old, and so the king didn't give them as much credit or as favor, like, because they were still young. These are, we can assume, like, hey, these guys are older. And so the king has been around them more.
Well, it's almost as if the king leaned on what he was accustomed to and what he was used to and what he was familiar with instead of that which he had seen as more impressive.
Right.
Which is kind of interesting, and I think also something that we need to look out for
Yeah.
in our own lives. All right, why don't we take a look at 19 through 24. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, "May the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the periods. He removes kings and appoints kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to people of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter." Thereupon Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to kill the wise men of Babylon. He went and said this to him, "Do not kill the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king." Okay, so Daniel gets an answer, and something I wanted to mention first is if we go back to verse 18 and we look at how Daniel and his friends prayed, they prayed for compassion from God.
Yeah.
And and his compassion would be to give them revelation, right? I think that's really telling. I think it fits also in the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
When we hear Jesus say, "This is how you ought to pray: Your kingdom come, Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." You know, he wasn't commanding. He didn't declare things. He went to the source and said, "In Your compassion and in Your mercy, please make this known to me." Right.
Right.
And God heard him and answered his prayer. So he gets the dream, and this whole portion here, 19 through 24, is just Daniel giving thanksgiving, and the praise that he offers up, the poem or the song that he offers up here, is very much a major theme of the book of Daniel. Right. And he says, God's the one who knows all things, reveals all things, rules all things. He aligns all things. He puts all the kings on their thrones. He takes them off of their thrones because he is the only true king. Right. Yeah. So this is really the theme of the rest of this book.
Yeah.
Right. Which I think is pretty cool. So now Daniel's ready and he says, "Take me to the king and don't kill anybody."
Right.
Which I think is also interesting because the people, and we're going to see this in the next chapter too, the people that Daniel says don't kill them and he wants to spare their life are not good people.
Yeah.
Right. And the king didn't trust them, rightfully so. And those people end up turning on Daniel and his friends later on.
Right.
As everything continues. So, but they listen, they say, "Hey, look, we're going to bring Daniel to the king." And that takes us to verse 25.
For sure.
So 25 through 30 says, "Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows. I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king." The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, "Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation?" Daniel answered before the king and said, "As for the secret about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, sorcerers, soothsayer priests, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turn to what would take place in the future. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will take place. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living person, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind." So before the king, Daniel agrees with the other advisors.
Yeah.
It's like, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Men doesn't have the power to do that.
Those guys that said they can't do that, they're right.
Yeah.
Yes. No one other than living on earth, other than a God, can do that. And they're right, and not a God, but the God.
Right. Yeah. And specifically to the God of heaven.
Yeah.
Now we remember the soothsayers said, like, gods don't dwell in flesh.
Right.
And Daniel says this God is in heaven, right? He is not necessarily here. But this God has condescended himself to speak to Daniel, right? So he does say, look, they're right, only a God can give you this answer, but this God will give you this answer.
Yeah.
He will speak with you. He will talk to you, right? And then in doing all of this, Daniel gives all the credit to God. Daniel was like, I'm not super wise.
Yeah, this isn't coming from my own wisdom. This is wisdom, from God. I was actually just in a Bible study recently. We're talking about spiritual gifts, and I think that's one of the things that was spiritual gifts, and even which is interesting because spiritual gifts we think of as a New Testament kind of thing that Paul talks about. But it's very clear that Daniel is a wise man, that God has granted him wisdom, but he's saying, I am not wise. It is God's working through wisdom that he placed in me. It
Right.
is God working through me, not this isn't of my own doing. I didn't come up with this. This isn't me saying this. I'm just saying I'm just the messenger.
Yeah.
So don't kill the messenger.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So he then tells the king, of course, this is about the end times. And that gets us to verses 31 through 35. And this is a description of the dream. You, O king, were watching, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary radiance, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of the statue was made of fine gold, its chest and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued watching until a stone was broken off without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed to pieces, all at the same time, and they were like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the entire earth. All right, so that was the dream. That's the dream that he has, right? And of course, I understand why he would be confused.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this giant statue. It's made of all these different materials. There's a rock, and he says the rock was broken off without hands, which is important. And it destroys the statue by striking it at the feet. Everything that's there is turned to dust, but that rock becomes a mountain, and it fills the whole earth.
Yeah.
Right? So let's go ahead and jump into the interpretation. So we're going to take this a couple verses at a time to look at these specific interpretations as Daniel gives them. So if you follow along in your Bible, you might see these natural breaks. If your Bible has titles, you might kind of see where we broke. But let's go here and let's look at 36 through 38. This was the dream, and now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the honor. And wherever the sons of mankind live, or the animals of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has handed them over to you and has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. Okay, so Babylon, as ruled by King Nebuchadnezzar, that's the head. This is this gold thing. And in telling the king this, he also says, God has allowed you to be the King of Kings. He's allowed you to be this great ruler. Right?
Yeah, he's taking a little bit of credit away from him, and so he realizes this. And and this isn't just a theme that we read here in Daniel. This is something that even is talked about in the New Testament. Like no person is in charge without God putting there, whether they be president, whether they be king, whether they be governor, whatever, anyone in authority, as we are called to obey and respect and submit to within the realms of what God has allowed, basically, or what pleases God, we'll say. No one is there without God putting them there.
Absolutely. All right, so that's the head. Then we get to verse 39. Verse 39 says, "And after you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth." Okay, so he is insinuating here immediately that these next kingdoms aren't as great as the kingdom of Babylon.
Yeah.
That they're progressively getting weaker or less awesome.
Yeah.
We should say, right?
Yeah, because as you see it, the things that the statue are made of get progressively weaker and not as strong as you go down. It goes gold, and then it's iron, and then baked clay, which is weaker, and then
Well, yeah, it's gold, silver, bronze.
Right.
And so we see it kind of reduces in worth and value.
Yeah.
But then when you hit the iron, you kind of hit the strongest, right?
Yeah.
And the iron is kind of where it's
That's true. Yeah, that's
it's
true.
maybe not as beautiful or as ornate, but it's efficient. We'll get
Right.
into that here in a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so but with verse 39, most people, gosh, and here's the thing: you kind of get into. There's a number of interpretations here, right? But the prevailing interpretation here is that the silver portion is specifically the kingdom of the Medo-Persian kingdom, right? So essentially, this is like a dual kingdom that will take over Babylon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, here's the beauty of this, us reading this prophecy is we saw how it worked out.
Yeah. Right. We can kind of go back and, but there's some of it that's still kind of to be determined. So we'll kind of touch on a little bit of that, right?
Yeah.
And then after that is the bronze, and the bronze is believed to be Greece, right? So these are described as lesser kingdoms in Babylon. And of course, Greece, we kind of know the history of Greece there.
Will rule the whole earth, yeah.
Right.
A big, mighty kingdom, for sure.
Right, exactly. So Greece did spread out quite a bit. So those are fitting descriptions of what Daniel would be referring to. Then let's look at verses 40 through 43. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron. Just as iron smashes and crushes everything, so like iron that crushes it, it will smash and crush all these things. And in that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have within it some of the toughness of iron, since you saw the iron mixed with common clay. And just as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be fragile. In that you saw the iron mixed with common clay. They will combine with one another and their descendants, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not combine with pottery. Okay, so the interpretation here, and what a lot of people will tell you, is that the iron is a representation of Rome, right? And Rome is like, iron makes sense, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of the last, Rome is kind of the last great empire.
For sure.
You know, and it demolishes everything that was before it, puts everything under its foot, you know, crushes everything, right? It is very efficient. It's very militaristic. Like, it's a very fitting description here for Rome, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So then when it gets down to the feet, and again, there are some differing versions of this, but this is where I would land on this, is when the iron mixes with the clay, this is believed to be what you would say that are the latter kingdoms, right? So we know Rome is kind of the last great world power, the last great kingdom, right? But when you look at like what he describes with the feet and the toes, and how there's some of them are pottery and some of them are iron, and they don't mix, but they are together.
Yeah.
This really gives me an impression of a lot of like kind of what we've evolved into today.
Yeah.
Right? You have some powers that are with other groups that are maybe not as powerful, that need the power of others. We're unified, but not.
Yeah.
Right? We're not currently in a global war, although, you know,
we'll see.
we'll see. You know, hopefully by the time this posts, we're not in a global war.
Yeah.
You know, but like there is this tension. We're unified, but not, right? And some things are strong and some things are weak. And that's, to me, that really fits with the current system. I don't want to say that we're in the quote unquote last of the last days. I don't know that. You know, but this makes sense that what he's referring to would apply to the current political powers that we see today across the globe.
Yeah, and that's what I was meaning before about it gets there's the iron and there's the clay that's not as strong. Yeah, as you put. And yes, as he says here, iron and clay don't really mix.
Right.
You know, and so because of that, there's always going to be division here. There's going to be power, there's going to be stronger, those power, and those going to be weaker. And they're just going to break apart, and they're going to break themselves apart, basically. They're never going to mix.
Right, exactly. So then that gets us to the last kingdom, and this is going to be verses 44 through 45. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Just as you saw that a stone was broken off from the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is certain, and its interpretation is trustworthy. So this last kingdom that Daniel describes is the kingdom of heaven. Now, I've said that there were a couple different translations here. So some people have said that the Medo-Persians are actually separate, and that the Medo Empire is the silver, the Persians are the bronze, which would make the Greeks the iron and would make the Romans the clay feet.
Right.
And the reason they say this is because this stone that was broken off from the mountain without hands, this is Jesus. This is the Messiah, right? This is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. You know, hallelujah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so some people have put it in those terms because where does Jesus arrive? During the Roman Empire, right?
Yeah.
But I don't tend to subscribe to that for a couple reasons. But one, namely, Jesus didn't crush the Roman Empire,
Yeah.
right? He, not in this.
Not yet, anyway.
Yeah. Not in this pattern, right? And we understand that the second coming of Christ is when he comes as a conqueror.
Yeah.
To put all nations under his thumb, so to speak.
Right.
So I don't really see that as being the case, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know that, but that doesn't really change much.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
But I think what we can agree on is that this stone that was broken off the mountain without hands, this is the Messiah. This is Jesus, right? Who is later described as the cornerstone that the builders rejected, right? Jesus is always in a number of places compared to being a stone or a rock or a foundation, right? And then the mountain that grows out of this is the kingdom of God, right? And then I love how he finishes this. He's like, so the dream is certain and the interpretation is trustworthy. Right?
Like, given that I just told you everything that you said you dreamt without you telling me, trust me.
you can trust my interpretation because you know I got it right.
Right.
You know that I said the dream as you intended.
Yeah.
All right. So then that gets us to verse 46 and 49 through 49, and then
and I think and he says the dream is true. Also, meaning, like we were joking about at the beginning of this, like some dreams are just
dreams.
Yeah, they're just dreams, and they're just gobbledygook that makes no sense,
Yeah.
But he's like, this meant something.
Yeah. Your anxiety was well founded.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were right to be disturbed because you were seeing
this is a prophecy. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's important. Like, he sees not just his end, but he sees the coming end of time.
Yeah.
Right. In this. So that's a pretty amazing thing.
Big deal.
Yeah. All right. So verses 46 through 49. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and paid humble respect to Daniel and gave orders to present to him an offering and incense. The king responded to Daniel and said, "Your God truly is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, since you have been able to reveal this secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon while Daniel was at the king's court. So we see the king humbles himself and he bows down. And this is something that's, I think, is both a credit to Nebuchadnezzar, but also a fault of Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't really praise God.
Yeah.
He praises Daniel and Daniel's God.
Yeah.
Right? He gives everything, his gratitude is all to Daniel, not to the God who gave him both the dream and the interpretation. And even Daniel said, I'm not, it's not me. God
Right.
is revealing this to you. And he's like, oh, you're amazing, Daniel.
Yeah.
You know?
He's trying to give him all the credit, and he's trying to praise him, and Daniel's like, no, not me.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, we see the roller coaster that is Nebuchadnezzar, who goes from
Yeah.
wanting to kill everybody to throwing himself on his face.
And yes, and giving him incense and all of these things, and making him ruler over the entire province of Babylon. Yeah, that's a bit of a, as you say, roller coaster.
Yeah, a bit of a roller coaster there. And then he respects Daniel so much that Daniel says, hey, I would like for you to appoint my friends to these other administrative positions as well. And he says, yeah, of course. And so now we've got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They are now in positions of power as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and when years ago when I was younger and not as well versed as I am now, not that I'm super well versed, but I was impressed, like, oh, King Nebuchadnezzar, he gets it, and he's giving worship to God. But you really read this, is like, actually, no, he's not. He's falling prostrate kind of out of fear almost. And he's like, okay, your God gets it, because he's not saying the God, you're the God of heaven. He's saying your God is better than all the other gods.
Right.
And so,
yeah, at least in this matter, right?
Yeah.
Like what we're going to see over the next couple chapters, King Nebuchadnezzar has not given his heart to God.
right.
He still thinks much more of himself and his own ways than he does of Daniel. But in this matter, he recognizes that this was a great thing that has happened, and takes Daniel at his word that he got it through his God.
Yeah, I mean, think of the challenge that he put forth. He's told all of these sorcerers and astrologers and whatever you want to call them, no, tell me my dream so that I know what you're interpreting is true.
Yeah.
And Daniel does.
I think this is another indictment on us as humans is, King Nebuchadnezzar is not an idiot.
Yeah.
Right? We often think that if we had the signs and symbols that were given in the Old Testament and in the times of Jesus, that we would be like firm in our faith.
Yeah.
Right? King Nebuchadnezzar doesn't give up his pride, doesn't give up his arrogance, doesn't give up his own gods, doesn't give up his own ways.
Yeah.
Even after this. Mm-hmm. And he still honors God.
Yeah.
With his words, but not with his actions, right?
Right. It's empty talk.
Yeah. King Nebuchadnezzar doesn't get it, right? Even as he says, your God is the Lord of kings, he doesn't submit to the Lord as a king. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that's something that we can all learn from and say, that's a mistake.
Yeah.
Right? All right, so we're going to see more about Nebuchadnezzar's, blunders as we get into chapter 3 next time.
Like immediately, like first verse.
Right, it's just going to continue here. So we'll go ahead and go there. Is there anything else that we need to talk about before we?
I don't think so, no.
Oh, great. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this Daniel chapter 2. As always, go deeper, get a good commentary. Go find some things that you can, because there is so much packed into the book of Daniel. We're touching the surface here and explaining some things and kind of helping understand some things, but you can always go deeper if you so choose.
Yep, for sure.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.